Over the years, some have asserted that Isaac, the son of Abraham, took Rebekah to be his wife when she was 3 years old and he was 40. It's typically Muslims who make this argument. It would seem some of them make this argument in response to Christians pointing out that Muhammad married Aisha when she was 6 years old. The passages that are supposed to support this argument are found in Genesis chapter 22 through chapter 24. Let's go ahead and examine those passages and see if they really do support the notion that Isaac married Rebekah when she was a 3-year-old girl. Genesis 22 starts off with God testing Abraham by telling him to sacrifice his only son Isaac. That ordeal concludes in verse 19. And then verses 20 through 23 says, "And it came to pass, after these things, that it was told Abraham, saying, Behold, Milcah, she hath also borne children unto thy brother Nahor, Huz his firstborn, and Buz his brother, and Chemul the father of Aram, and Hesed, and Hazo, and Pildash, and Jidlaph, and Bethuel. And Bethuel begat Rebekah. These 8 Milcah did bear to Nahor, Abraham's brother." Now Genesis 23:1 tells us that Sarah died when she was 127 years old. So doing some simple math tells us that Isaac was 37 at this time, since we know Sarah gave birth to Isaac when she was 90. So essentially the argument is this. If Rebekah was born shortly before Sarah died, then she would have only been around 3 years old when her and Isaac got married, since Isaac was 40 when they got married. The underlying assumption in this argument is that Rebekah was in fact born shortly before Sarah died. But of course the passage doesn't tell us that, or even imply it. Genesis 22:20 says, "And it came to pass after these things that it was told Abraham, saying, Behold, Milcah, she hath also borne children unto thy brother Nahor." So it was at this time that Abraham was told about his brother's children. The verse doesn't say that his brother's children were born at this time. Also keep in mind that 8 children and 1 granddaughter, the granddaughter being Rebekah, of course, are listed in the passage. Are we to believe that all of the children and the grandchild had just been born since they're all listed in the passage? Of course not. We know that's not how it works. And neither chapter 22 nor chapter 23 says how much time had passed from that point to when Sarah died. So proponents of this particular argument are attempting to fill in the gaps by making a lot of assumptions, which is completely unjustified. So at the end of the day, we simply have to admit that we don't know how old Rebekah was when she married Isaac. The text doesn't tell us. However, chapter 24 tells us a lot of things that strongly indicate that Rebekah had to be much older than 3 when she married Isaac. In Genesis chapter 24, Abraham sends his servant to his father's house to find Isaac a wife. Verses 10 through 11 says, "And the servant took 10 camels of the camels of his master and departed, for all the goods of his master were in his hand. And he arose and went to Mesopotamia unto the city of Nahor, and he made his camels to kneel down without the city by a well of water at the time of the evening, even the time that women go out to draw water." Now let's skip down to verse 15. Verse 15 says, "And it came to pass, before he had done speaking, that behold, Rebekah came out, who was born to Bethuel, son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, with her pitcher upon her shoulder." Now, if you read these 2 verses closely, you can plainly see that the author is clearly stating that Rebekah is a woman. Verse 11 says that the servant made his camels to kneel down at the evening time, which was the time that women would go out to draw water. And verse 15 says that Rebekah came out with her pitcher upon her shoulder. And verse 16 states that she filled her pitcher. So the text makes it clear that Rebekah is a woman and not a girl. According to the text, it was women that came out in the evening to draw water. Rebekah came out in the evening to draw water, and she did draw water. Therefore, Rebekah must be a woman, according to what the text says. That's clearly what's being communicated. Now, if someone just wants to deny the text itself, they can choose to do that. But the argument that Rebekah was only 3 when she got married to Isaac is supposed to be based on what the text says. So in order for proponents of this argument to be consistent, they have to go by what the text says. Because if they deny the text, then they have to deny their own argument as well, which would be incoherent and self-defeating. So if we're going to go by what the text says, then we have to accept that the text is clearly portraying Rebekah as a woman and not as a 3-year-old girl. In this whole chapter, there isn't one indication that she's 3 years old. Everything we see her do in the chapter indicates that she's much older than 3. In verse 16, she goes down to the well and fills her pitcher. In verse 20, she draws water for all of the servants' camels. And in verse 58, she speaks for herself when she tells her mother and brother that she will go with the servant. Everything she does and says in this chapter strongly indicates that she is not a little 3-year-old girl. So in conclusion, we've established that the timeline argument doesn't work because you have to make assumptions, which is unjustified. And we've also established that none of the passages in any way indicate that Rebekah was 3 years old when she married Isaac. On the contrary, they indicate that she had to be much older than 3 when she married Isaac. Therefore, there is no reason for us to think that she was 3 when she married Isaac.